If trade news from one country outside the U.S. affects domestic grain markets more than any other, it's probably China. The country began heavily importing soybeans in the mid-1990s and has increased those numbers since. It became a net importer of corn in 2010, and some believe those imports will only go up. As you'll hear from industry leaders and academic experts, the massive country with rising influence needs to partner with other nations to meet its demands. This is only one of many streets in Shanghai. It's also one of the reasons that China is a major player in world agriculture. Crowded streets and congested sidewalks, each getting busier by the day. This country of 1.3 billion people holds nearly 20% of the world's population. And that population is not only growing, but also growing in the middle class. More people with higher incomes are asking for a diet with more protein. Even though China is a large agricultural producer in its own right, it's just not big enough to fill that demand.
Well, you know what's interesting actually about China? China is the largest pork producer. It's the largest wheat producer. It's the second largest corn, fourth largest soybeans, etc. But most of production and consumption remains local.
When it comes to food, China isn't self-sustainable. There are too many people and not enough land. Its rural population is rapidly moving to larger cities at a pace of 15 to 20 million people per year. The country's overall growth, while perhaps disappointing to some, is vastly greater than what the U.S. sees at home.
They're growing, for example, at 9, 10, or 11% per year. In the United States, if we were to grow at 2.5% per year in 2012, we would be very happy. Okay, they're growing at 3 to 4 times what we are, and they want to sustain that.
Maintaining an adequate food supply means importing agricultural goods, such as U.S. soybeans, to feed livestock, such as pork, in country. But this policy wasn't seen before the mid-1990s, when China realized instead of growing a wide variation of crops, it would narrow its attention to a select few.
So they shifted their focus away from a lot of the crops and really focused on two major important crops for them, maize and rice, and let soybeans go.
The country is now the destination for 60% of world soybean exports, with Brazil and the United States as the leaders. Many of those soybeans are crushed in China. The oil has many uses, including cooking oil. The meal helps to feed over 600 million hogs. As a point of reference for the size of China's pork production, the second leading pork-producing country in the world, the U.S., is 5 to 6 times smaller, and Chinese intake in that sector continues to grow. Pork consumption there has doubled since 1990. While the U.S. is important to that industry and others, China isn't relying solely on the United States or Brazil or Argentina or any other nation to meet its food needs. To fill the diets of an increasing nation, China is making foreign investments in land and warehouses to complement its trade.
You need the protein to feed the people in China. Therefore, China now today is aggressively going overseas and buying the land, buying the warehouses, and also looking for reliable partners that they can supply the protein to China on a sustainable basis.
China needs a lot of grain. Many wonder why China doesn't use genetically modified crops to produce more bushels. While China does import GM corn and soybeans, it doesn't produce any domestically. Jennie Shen is the Director for Business Affairs and Business Development with Pioneer China. She thinks China is waiting until it can optimize regulation and allow local seed companies to compete in a developed market.
I believe GM trade commercialization approval in China is just sooner or later. I actually personally believe it will be sooner. However, China's evolution, China's development has to be on at China's pace when government feel they are ready.
Until that time, major grain producers will vie for Chinese business. Big business when it comes to soybeans. The USDA's numbers show China bought 895 million bushels of U.S. soybeans for 2010-2011. That's 7 times more beans than Mexico bought as the United States' second leading customer. But does the potential for lucrative sales lead to a natural competition between the U.S. and Brazil?
I'm not so sure, you know, in a bull market that competition is maybe the operative word. China will be sitting there saying, you know, do I want a U.S. bean or do I want a Brazil bean? But they don't have a choice. They got to buy beans. They're going to buy.
At least from somewhere, and especially if current consumer preferences stay consistent. For farmers in the Midwest, producing desirable grains like corn and beans, the Chinese market looks bright, though how long the window of opportunity remains open is unsure. As one analyst says, China may match demands in some areas, but with increases in population and income, the country can't meet its growing needs without help.
Ultimately speaking, China has very limited arable land. Only about 15% of the country is usable for crops. You know, the rest is desert or forest. And so if you factor in the fact that it has maybe, you know, very small percentage of arable land with a large growing population and a population that's also joining the middle class, there's no way they can be efficient and be self-sustainable.